So it turns out, as not many people realise, in fact, even a lot of Kiwis don't know this, New Zealand is actually a registered corporation. The country is named after the New Zealand Company, which is a trading company from the 19th century that was operated by British nobility and even a media baron who helped to propagandize the British settlers by literally whitewashing the oppression of the indigenous peoples of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and all for the sake of the profit and prestige of the head of the Commonwealth. So it is only fitting for us to now hear from someone who has given the government of Her Majesty the Queen a massive pain in the backside. Hacktivist Lauri Love. Lauri, take it away. Tell us about what has been going on with you.
Right, so first thing, as a descendant and heir of the New Zealand magnate, I need to correct a few. Yeah, no, the whole history of colonialism in New Zealand and Australia is worth people paying attention to, and it is far from finished, as you have been hearing with the Five Eyes spying arrangements. And if you'll remember, sometimes if the government is the wrong kind, our government will step in and get rid of it, as happened notably in Australia. So as for my case, like Barrett Brown, I at some point became a person of interest to powers that be in the United States, Department of Justice particularly. And 4 years ago, in October 2013, I was arrested by our National Crime Agency, a newly formed attempt to emulate the FBI in the UK, for obscure reasons, because I don't know why anyone who knows about the FBI would try to emulate them. So they arrested me by pretending to be UPS delivery person to trick their way into our house, and then spent 4 to 5 hours terrorizing my mum and dad, similarly to with Barrett Brown, ransacking the house, taking anything that could possibly store data, and eventually about midnight drove me in a unmarked police car without a seatbelt, very fast down country roads to be processed, kept in a cell overnight, and then questioned extensively by a large cohort of these National Crime Agency officers, ostensibly, though I have reason to believe some of them may have been working for the FBI or at least reporting to them. So I was questioned about a series of intrusions, of compromises of US government computer systems, which happened in conjunction with a anonymous campaign after the death of Aaron Swartz to effectively promote some reform of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, under which he was hounded to death for effectively borrowing too many scientific articles from an online archive. Everyone will remember how tragic the end of Aaron Swartz's wonderful and promising life was, and there was a large and emotive response from the internet community to the effect that we should never ever allow this to happen again, and some serious questions need to be asked about why it did happen. Those efforts to understand and fix the system are ongoing. The ones through the official channels seem to have somewhat stalled at the moment, but there are a lot of campaigners and activists who are trying to continue to fix this. One effort, as I said, came in the form of an anonymous hacktivist campaign where some website for the United States Sentencing Commission was defaced with a video, and I think from what I recall from the stories, you could play asteroids on it for a bit, which seems like a more useful purpose for it than explaining to judges how to ruin people's lives. I was released on bail without charge because, strangely enough, they didn't find any evidence that I was involved in any way in this campaign. So I was kept on bail for the National Crime Agency. Obviously, my passport was nicked and I didn't have my computers. I still don't have my computers, despite not being charged in the UK and it being nearly 4 years. I'm politely asking for them back via the court system, but they've cleverly put off that civil court action until after my extradition hearing, where there is a significant possibility I won't be able to fight it because I'll be in a small box in America or dead. But anyway, so 2 years later, in July of 2015, by this point I'd been released from bail. I had my passport. I had successfully gone to the Chaos Computer Conference in Hamburg, where it was at the time, which was fantastic, where I met Sarah Harrison from WikiLeaks and a number of other very fantastic people. And I just thought the remaining battle was to get my computers back, because, you know, my theory is the government shouldn't be able to take away someone's entire digital estate, all of their digital possessions and property, personal documents, photographs, software projects, correspondence with journalists, potentially information of high crimes and misdemeanors, legally, professionally privileged correspondence with journalists, government figures, etc., hypothetically, and not return it and not return the hardware from which it was stolen, despite not actually having the powers to do so. And the law is very clearly on my side, and I will win the case when they finally get around to giving me the right to have my day in court, which they were very clever about avoiding so far. But the point of this was in July of 2015, some remarkably similarly dressed and hairstyled burly men turned up with kind of work-related trainers on, and I had an ominous premonition that I would not be having a great day. And true enough, they said, "We're from the Metropolitan Police Extradition Unit. We're here to take you back to America," which is the way they put it, because ordinarily they are apprehending people who have fled justice, usually from Europe in the UK, and almost 9 out of 10 times they are taken back, and they then answer in the court system where they're accused of committed crimes. So I spent the long drive to London explaining to them that I've never been to the United States of America, therefore I can't go back, and this isn't an ordinary case. They want to lock me up for the rest of my life for things which definitely weren't in violation of US law, because they didn't happen. There was no crime that could have been committed in America, and really, they should be talking to the National Crime Agency and the Crown Prosecution Service about why I wasn't charged and taken through our relatively functional and humane court system here in the UK. This was all lost on them. Their job was effectively delivery, and they said that they would get me back this evening, which, being incredibly naive and foolish, I believed. So I didn't take this thing, for instance, which keeps me alive if my lungs start to seize up, or a book to read in the police station, where I ended up for a day and a half, or my passport, or my wallet, or my telephone, or any of the other things you should probably try and take with you if you're being kidnapped and they give you 5 minutes to grab some things. The reason I didn't get all these things is they were worried that they would try and seize computers, so I was trying to kind of get out of there before that occurred to them. So I was taken to a police station. I was processed through Westminster Magistrates Court, which handles extradition cases. I was granted bail on the condition that my passports were surrendered, that originally they tried daily reporting condition, which means I would have to go to the police every day and squiggle on a bit of paper. This is not feasible because of where I live, remote out in the country, not having my own form of motor transport and being dependent on buses, which don't run on Sundays and bank holidays. So they were haggled down to twice a week, passports surrendered. The sticking point was the £5,000 of money that they wanted before I would be released, which my parents were able to cough up with some help from friends and selling their motorhome, which I still feel quite bad about. That was their little hobby. They're getting to that period in their life where they deserve to go on nice trips in motorhomes. Because the money didn't get there in time, if anyone's been following the case of malware tech, this happened to him. He's in prison over the weekend, in jail, in Las Vegas, because the $30,000 wasn't able to be transferred from the UK in the half an hour they gave him to do that. The same for me. I got out of the bail hearing at about 4 o'clock. My parents had an hour to get the money to the court. This didn't happen, so went back to the police station, stayed there the night, asked them, "Can I go home now?" Said nope. Tried to take me to a prison that was full. Tried to take me to another prison that was full. This was actually before I stayed the night in the police station, so I went back and stayed the night in the police station. The next day, instead of letting me out, they took me to another to another prison, Her Majesty's Prison in Thameside, which is a bit of a misnomer because it's not Her Majesty's Prison in the sense it's not run by Her Majesty's Prison. It's run by a private security company called Serco, which is an interesting experience being in their custody. So yeah, I ended up spending, to keep this a bit briefer, ended up spending about 72 hours in prison, despite having been given bail, unable to call my parents or my lawyer, a little bit worried about what they'd be thinking, a little bit worried that I'd be lost in the system and rots there, which isn't inconceivable with the level of incompetence. And generally they sort of denied me a few of the things that they ought to give you, such as access to a chaplain and a phone call and medicines and things. And eventually they got the memo that I was let out, that I shouldn't be in prison and should be on bail. And I was perfunctorily turfed out eventually with 50p to make a phone call and a bit of paper that was good for the train trip to central London, which is not where I live. I live several hours away from central London in the countryside and didn't have a phone or any money to do that bit of the journey. So I had the great fun of having to convince a traffic cop to let me use his phone and then convince the anally retentive railway revenue protection staff to let me on the train and the ticket would be paid for on the other side. This didn't work, so I just wait another hour and a half for that money ticket thing to be signed. And eventually made it home. And since then, I have been on extradition bail. So twice a week, I get on the bus to squiggle on a bit of paper, and the lovely country bumpkin police cops ask me why I'm still coming here and haven't they given me a job yet, etc. And quite often I have to go to London for legal meetings and for court appearances. We lost at the district court, which was the main hearing, happened in July of last year. The verdict came in September. We were incredibly surprised to lose for a few reasons, the main one being the United States didn't submit any evidence or call any witnesses or do anything apart from very superficially and cynically cross-examine the 14 witnesses that the defense called, including 3 experts on United States Computer Fraud and Abuse Act law, sentencing guidelines, experts on the conditions in US detention, which Barrett Brown can tell you about at length, or you can read about from his wonderful columns, etc. Experts on my mental health history, which is a lot of clinical depression, anxiety, and Asperger's we discovered during preparation for the case. And the United States didn't really have to do anything. They certainly didn't have to substantiate in any way their very hyped up accusations against me. Inflated damage figures, which at one point was $60 million, I think the US government believes that I owe them. I have tried to use this large amount of debt to restructure my obligations and try and get a covering loan from the bank for, say, $100 million, but it hasn't worked so far. So they effectively, because the United States entered into a very convenient extradition relations with the United Kingdom after 9/11, thanks to the gift that will never stop giving, Tony Blair, they're not required to make a prima facie case, which means that on the surface case, basically to the fact that have they at least got the right guy, save the proving it for their court system if that ever happens, but at least kind of substantiate that you picked the right guy and that these alleged crimes actually occurred and that there were actually damages, and it'd be nice to hear from some of these so-called victims. And so none of this happened. Everything is accepted on face value by the courts as a hypothetical. So multiple times I actually had to slightly impolitely put my hand up and pause the hearing, take all of the 50 people from the public gallery and press outside, explain to them that despite the fact that none of these assertions assertions will be questioned, they are not facts. Bizarrely, the court doesn't care whether they're facts. They're happy to keep them as hypotheses, but still be influenced by the exaggerations and the hyperbole in them. So in the district judge's judgment, passing the extradition to the Home Secretary, who rubber stamps it. She said because this is a very serious case with such large damages, etc., etc., she was more inclined to have the prosecution in the United States. So the legal argument basically came down to what is the appropriate forum, which is kind of another word for venue. And the reason we argued under this forum bar is that was the change in law after the 10-year struggle of Gary McKinnon, a young man from Scotland who, in an incredibly freakishly parallel similar case to mine, was also accused of hacking into NASA, was not accused of doing it for criminal intent. His rationale was he wanted to see if aliens existed, and he wanted to see evidence about free energy and other things that the US government might be keeping secret from us. Not sure what he found. That's kind of academic, but it was very clear that this was not a nefarious person trying to enrich themselves at the cost of the US government. It was not a malicious person trying to cause damage to the US government. It was a seeker after truth, which is something that I think we can all sympathize with. And this didn't do him any good in court. He lost all of the hearings, all of the appeals, right the way through the Supreme Court. The case was declined to be taken further by the European Court of Human Rights. So he was waiting to be, as I would put it, kidnapped and extraordinarily rendered, although in this case it would be ordinarily rendered because it was through the legal process, and put in a small box for the rest of his life. There was an intervention because at that time the Home Secretary, our beloved Theresa May, who is now, at least on paper still, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, intervened. She had the discretion to do that at the time, which I believe actually the Home Secretary still has the discretion to do, because it is inherently a political act to surrender a subject who is under your protection, inferior as a citizen, and to surrender them to another sovereign power. That's not the government's position. So after Theresa May was effectively had her arm twisted and her heartstrings, let's say, put on a artificial life machine, by the power of the public, by strong campaigns from newspapers, a lot of people turning up in the streets, raising some noise, her indefatigable and amazing mother, his mother, Janice Sharp, who not for one single day didn't do everything she could to write to people to solicit the help of pop stars and musicians and anyone else who would be sympathetic. So Theresa May said, no, I am refusing to sign the final stage of this extradition warrant because Gary McKinnon has, amongst other things, had severe Asperger's syndrome, and simply the United States detention system, its ability to accommodate his needs, was so woeful that it was an insurmountable chance that he would attempt to end his own life, and this would be considered a bad thing, so the extradition was blocked to ensure that they were never put in this tricky situation again of upsetting their special relationship bosses, effectively. The laws changed. It introduced this thing called the forum bar, which simply put says if it's in the interests of justice for the prosecution to proceed domestically, rather than in the requesting authority, there should be no extradition, which is great. It's never once worked since it's been introduced, and it was a bit of an act of legislative sleight of hand, because at the same time they didn't, raise as much fanfare about it, but they transferred the discretion of the Home Secretary to consider the implications for the requested person's human rights of their extradition. That was transferred to the courts, and this is obviously a meaningless and newspeak choice of verb, because it's not like the courts didn't have the power to consider human rights. That was incumbent on them throughout, so they didn't give the court any new powers. All they did was tie the hands of the Home Secretary and say there is no discretion to consider human rights, which I think is incredibly troubling legal position for any government, and I intend to hang them by the neck for it, metaphorically speaking, when I get the chance. the reason for this is I have a letter signed by Amber Rudd, our Home Secretary, again in name only, saying, while I accept that there is a significant chance, Mr. Love, that you will die in US custody, I do not have the discretion to consider how your human rights will be violated by my decision to sign this bit of paper. I'm obviously paraphrasing, but that's the gist of it. She knows bad things will happen. There's a strong chance of a breach of my human rights if I am kidnapped and locked in a box for the rest of my life, or I'll explain why my passage through the criminal justice system will be even more Kafkaesque than is usual in a bit. But the worrying thing is that she can say, yes, I will implicitly, actually through an overt act, allow your human rights to probably be violated, and I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about it because the law ties my hands. I don't think that will actually pass a test if it goes to judicial review, because the human rights, you can't bind your own hands against considering human rights. It's absolutely necessary in any decision made by any public servant that they consider the implications, and if there is a reasonable chance that human rights will be violated as a direct consequence of their decision, then they may not make that decision. That is simple and unavoidable. But anyway, it happened regardless. So we had to ask leave, so doff our caps and say, please, Mr. High Court judges, do you have a few days to hear our case, and does our appeal have any merits? They eventually agreed, and not just that it had enough merit to warrant an appeal, that the case raised issues of great importance. One of the reasons why it might raise issues of great importance is that the charges on the US indictments, again, I should remind you, I was never charged in the UK, so as far as UK law goes, I'm as innocent as they come. Charges in the United States, because of the bizarre sentencing guidelines, it's a kind of game of Kafka multiplier crazy arithmetic, or snakes and ladders. So I am being extradited in parallel to 3 different court districts in the United States, 3 different states. Trying to say this in roughly increasing order of terribleness, the state of New Jersey, which is notoriously corrupt. That was the venue in which they tried and wrongfully convicted Andrew Auernheimer, aka Weave, for using curl and changing a number to embarrass Apple for revealing all of the email addresses of the rich people that bought their iPhones. He was convicted. He did spend 1.5 years in prison, despite not having done the overt acts. And that conviction was eventually quashed because none of the alleged harm happened anywhere near New Jersey. They picked that court because they knew they'd have an easy time there. And actually, venue is important under US law. So Orrin Kerr and Tor Eklund, who sort of represents me as well, were able to get that conviction quashed, and Weave was released from prison. Unfortunately, by that time, he had completely lost his mind and is incredibly avid neo-Nazi now. And while I still have solidarity for him because of his experiences with the US government, obviously if I met him, I'd probably have to punch him, but that's another story. And so New Jersey is bad. It's corruption, real estate, Donald Trump, mafia land. That's still the worst, least bad of the 3. Then we have the Southern District of New York, which is where they try the terrorists. So if I went before a jury there, which is incredibly unlikely, I'll ever go before a jury in the United States, but they would push up it's a foreign person who attacked our national security. We're just down the road from ground zero, etc., etc., etc. And this is also the jurisdiction where Jeremy Hammond was sentenced to the maximum possible sentence under his non-cooperative plea agreement under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which was 10 years. He's still in prison. His rights are routinely violated. He's routinely subject to punitive, vindictive, disciplinary procedures, solitary confinement, trouble for reading the wrong kinds of literature, for free speech activities, just as happened with Barrett Brown, for organising other prisoners, etc. Generally not having a great time of it. And despite signing a plea agreement, there was no downwards departure from the sentencing maximum by the judge, who was also the judge that let Sabu, the snitch and scumbag who betrayed everyone in Lulsec to save his own hide, let him go on time served, despite the things that he was getting up to, both before and after his time cooperating with the FBI, being probably of more severity and not goodness than anything Jerry Hammond was accused of, specifically because the United States took the opportunity to have the FBI direct him to orchestrate attacks on foreign governments, which I'm sure they used to great benefit, and get away with it because, you know, it was just this criminal hacker who then was a confidential informant and then got some leeway, and so the whole thing's incredibly dodgy. So Sabu walked, despite being a reprehensible human being, and Jeremy Hammond is languishing in prison, despite being a wonderful human being. So I don't have much optimism about the Southern District of New York, but then the clincher is the Eastern District of Virginia, aka the Rocket Docket, for its amazing efficiency and speed of getting people into small boxes, under the very low chance that I would face a jury in the Eastern District of Virginia. They would all work for or be closely associated with the military-industrial complex. It's the Beltway, so there's not much chance that they would see me as a peer. There wouldn't be a jury of my peers. There would be a jury indirectly of people that would perceive themselves as my indirect alleged victims. But the worrying thing is, instead of consolidating all of these cases into a single district and venue and court, as they have done with much more trifling and trivial matters as the 9/11 terrorist plotters and other people that have actually hurt and killed innocent human beings, they all got one court. They are reserving the right to try me 3 times over. So what this means is, under the incredibly low prospects of me being successfully kidnapped, put in a plane, not dying mysteriously on that plane, I would be arraigned probably in the state of New York. I would absolutely, definitely be refused bail under the reasonable premise that if you have to kidnap someone, then you can assume they're a flight risk. And also because I have no connections in the United States, so no place where I could stay, etc., etc. So there would be no question of bail. They would keep me in pretrial detention. So all we have then is the matter of, which rights do I waive? Everyone waives their right to a speedy trial under the Constitution, because it's kind of, do you want to go into your very complex technical trial with hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of digital evidence tomorrow, or do you want to go for it in 2 years and spend the intervening time in prison where you can't really do much useful because you're kept incommunicado and not able to use technology? So I probably would waive that right to a speedy trial, because almost nobody takes the speedy trial, because it's a bit like representing yourself. Anyone who does that has a fool for a client, and you will go to jail. So they would keep me in pretrial detention. They would reserve the right, which I do believe I'm innocent, and asserted the right to proclaim that I'm innocent and to have the evidence tested in court. We could expect a year for it to go for the first court, for it to drag out for months because of the amount of evidence, or lack of evidence, but certainly the amount of data that they would throw at the court. And I would be kept behind bars the whole time. And even if I was acquitted, let's say they did New Jersey first, they would still take me to court in New York. And even if I was acquitted, they would still take me to court in Virginia. So I could end up spending perhaps 5 years in pretrial detention, and then miraculously be acquitted in all 3 courts. I don't say miraculously because I'm not very innocent. I say miraculously because the government, the federal Department of Justice prosecutors are very good at winning cases. Not necessarily in court. They're very good at winning cases because 96 to 97% of the federal cases never end up in court. So if you have 20 people in a room, 18 and a half of them just go to jail. They don't just go to jail. They sign a bit of paper saying I should go to jail, and they don't sign it because they believe it. They sign it because they don't take the plea agreement. The charges that can be stacked against them are so absurd, disproportionate, and barbaric that it's better to just not have a trial and to take the couple of years, the 3 years, the 5 years, the 10 years in Jeremy Hammond's case, because if he hadn't taken that agreement and forced them to make the effort to try and prove the case against him, it would have been 30 years, it would have been 40 years. The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act gives incredible leeway for prosecutors to add these modifiers, these bonus, these power-ups to the offence. So look into the case of Stephen Watt. There's a fantastic keynote that he gave at a conference about these. He goes into these modifiers and sentencing guidelines, but they can say if you committed the offence with sophistication or using a special skill or with the intent to cause damage to the United States government, or if the inflated or imaginary damage figures are above a certain level, etc. So in any case, Joshua Draytel and Tor Eklund and another expert did some analysis on this with the charges, with the free trials, with the
Lauri,
being treated. Yes?
can you hear me? This is Kim.
Yes, hi Kim.
Hi, I'd like to weigh in for a second here.
Oh, sure.
What's quite interesting is